And I'm going to give you an illustration. Jesus Christ is God and man in one person, the God-man. Now let me show you this. I have to slow down. This is so important. Now watch, the language is very important. There is only one person called Jesus. There aren't two Jesuses. There's only one person called Jesus. But this is where he's different. He has two natures. You and I have one nature. We are human. Okay? Well, one person, but he has two natures. Two natures. What are those two natures? He is human, which is a slam dunk. We know that, right? He's human. And here comes the controversial part. He's also divine or God. Okay. Now let me explain this a little bit to you, because there's been a lot of false teachings on this point about how these two natures relate to the one person. And there's two heresies, false teachings we want to stay away from. One false teaching is to blend the two natures together, to blend the divine and the human together. Let me give you an illustration of what it doesn't mean. Let's pretend that let me use white and black paint. Let's pretend the black paint pertains to his divine nature. Okay? And the white paint pertains to his human nature. Okay? Now, this has nothing to do with sin or anything like this. The black is the divine nature, white is the human nature. Okay? This would be a wrong understanding of the person of Jesus. We mix the black paint and the white paint together, and what color do we get? That's not what we're talking about. We're not mixing the divine and human natures together so that we get a hybrid. That would not be scriptural. The divine nature is always the divine nature, and the human nature is always the human nature. Now, one simple reason for those who have been with me, God can't change, right? But if we mixed him with something, he'd be what? Changed into something different. No, we keep the human and the divine very distinct. Well, what's the second heresy that's been taught throughout history? Well, the second heresy, in contrast to mixing the two natures together, the second heresy keeps the two natures together, but not in a meaningful way. It'd be like two boards glued together. Okay? Well, what's wrong with that? Well, with two boards glued together, there's no communion between the two natures, is there? Okay? Whereas here's the real picture. There is a communication between the divine and the human in the one person, Jesus. Let's pretend this is the human nature of Jesus, and this is the divine nature of Jesus. Rather than just being like two boards put together that have nothing to do with each other, now watch why I do this. The divine nature permeates the human nature. You understand by permeates? Okay. But permeates the human nature in such a way that the human and the divine are still what? Distinct. Distinct. Okay? Okay. Now, let me give you an illustration of this. And then we'll do a couple other things. This is Jesus. You didn't recognize him. I want you to pretend with me on what I've already told you. This orange plastic casing is the human nature of Jesus, meaning his physical and his soul, just like any normal human being, except for sin. Then I want you to pretend with me that the electricity would represent his divine nature. Okay? And I'm going to be using this illustration tonight and later tonight and next week too, so you're going to hear it several times. The moment Jesus was conceived in the womb of the Virgin Mary, that little fetus, you want to call it that. The moment he's conceived in the womb of the Virgin Mary, from that split second, he's God and man in one person. Okay? Then he's born and he grows up and everything. Okay? Now this is what we're going to watch. He's walking around with the disciples, right? And he looks like just what? An ordinary man, right? He has to eat and sleep. He gets hungry, so forth and so on. Later on, they're going to crucify him. Oh, but every once in a while, he does something a little bit different, doesn't he? Raises the dead. Walks on water, right? Feeds thousands of people with just a few loaves of bread and some fish. And a couple of weeks ago, some of you heard, or you may know the story, where he's transfigured on the Mount of Transfiguration between Peter, James, and John. And he glowed so bright they couldn't even look at him. Okay? This is what I'm going to show you tonight and next week. He's always God in human form. But when he was walking around on this earth, and I'll say this right now and I'll say it many times so you'll get it, He did not always or fully use his power as God. When he was walking around, he did not always or fully use his power as God. It just happened every once in a while, and he never used it fully. What we're going to learn next week, after he's raised from the dead, ascends into heaven, and sits at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, as a man, he always and fully uses his power as God. That's what we're going to be looking at. So these are the two natures of Christ. He is a human being just like us, except for sin, but he's also God in human form. That's the teachings of the Bible.